Okay, this video is, does science need God? And again, I had some talks that kind of got lost and I found them. And so what's happening is you might have seen some of these slides before, but some of them are new. And so basically, does science need God? What is this all about? Well, again, when I was in med school, I went through these textbooks pretty carefully, but now they got newer editions of the pathology textbook. These are the big textbooks. Pathology, big textbook, neurology. My cardiovascular physiology book, I can't find it, but I just went through it, as well as some neuropsychopharmacology. So here, what am I getting at? In the modern world, there's a tendency for people to think, well, science is the real stuff. Science is how we learn. The modern world has progressed so much. Religion is BS, hocus pocus, superstition. And what I'm going to tell you is, I actually think a lot of times it's the other way around. Religion does a lot of good things for people. This idea you're created in the image of God, therefore you are partly divine as well as part animal, if you will, such that you are entitled to natural rights. There's something special about you. If God is a creator, you can be a creator as well. That there's hope for the future, hope for the afterlife and all that. Your life is meaningful. God cares about you, loves you. All that stuff gives a person hope, helps give their life meaning, and makes them happier. It's the poor people like it. It's not something forced on them. It's something that they really like. And now there's an attitude, well, science is so great. Well, I'm going to tell you something. I've studied science for decades. And in my experience, most of what people think is science is just advertising. And so let's talk about that some more. Like people say, oh, look at all the science in diabetes. But if you talk to most people, including most people who take care of diabetic patients, they don't know anything about the real science of diabetes. And these textbooks, these are the Ivy League textbooks, the one that a lot of doctors read and certainly that are trained on in med school. There's nothing about the Sweeney paper in these books, nothing about the Hemsworth paper in these books, nothing about Rabinowitz papers, Kempner papers, Brownlee, Shulman papers. Those are all the foundational papers of diabetes. And they're the papers that show diabetes is caused by excessive dietary intake of high-fat diets. That's the most common reason. There's a few other things that contribute to it, excessive stress, etc. But that's the money, is the high-fat diet. And populations that don't eat a high-fat diet, they don't have next to zero type 2 diabetes. How come that's not known? How come that's not in the book? And I know there's also a fear, well, if we teach people about diet, then we won't have any patients anymore because everybody will be healthy. In my experience, almost no one is willing to eat these low-fat, 100% plant-based diets. Now, I realize, certainly on the internet you can find people who do anything. But in my own personal experience, talking to tons of doctors, tons of patients, hardly ever does somebody really change. Don't get me wrong, I've seen some patients and some doctor friends and their spouses and their families where people have made dramatic progress. But what I'm trying to say is the vast majority of the population has zero interest in becoming vegan, in my personal experience. The exception, of course, is the internet, where people seek out learning, and that's a higher intellectual crowd compared to the regular public. Okay, well, getting back to these books. These are the books that doctors are trained on. Autoimmune disease, nothing about leaky gut and the benefits of lowering sodium, just immunosuppressants. No one knows. Typically, that's what you'll see. No one knows what causes this disease, therefore you got to sell them drugs. Okay, hypertension. They'll say at least 90%, cause unknown, essential hypertension. And even the so-called experts will say this in the meetings, acting like they know what they're talking about. A big joke. Okay, we know high-fat diet causes high blood pressure. We know that high dietary sodium causes high blood pressure. Populations that, eat low-fat diets with no sodium added, they don't have any hypertension. We also know plant foods, you get your vasodilators, your potassium, and your magnesium. How come there's no mention of Walter Kempner and Richard Moore papers in the book? Okay? And it's not one thing. It's like almost every single chapter is missing the main point. So, either the people writing these massive textbooks, and there'll be, 20 or more authors each book, they're ignoramuses, or they're lying, and I actually think they're more often ignoramuses than lying. But it's pretty pathetic, We look back and we laugh at some guy from the 1700s, the head of internal medicine at an Ivy League school, saying what a joke that guy is. All he does is, prescribe the phlebotomy. But what does a modern internal medicine doctor do at most Ivy League hospitals. All they do is prescribe drugs. And, if you have a dietary disease, the first choice should be fix the diet, and which most patients will not comply with. That is true. But it should at least be attempted. And recommending the Mediterranean diet, which is a pretty common thing to do in Boston, for example, it's a crappy diet. It's a joke of a diet. It's high fat with all this fish and olive oil and wine and cheese. It's a terrible diet. And people just will sort of not stick to anything and just devolve down to eating whatever they want and use the Mediterranean diet as an excuse. When I hear somebody recommend the Mediterranean diet, it's like the sign ignoramus flashes up on their forehead. They don't know what they're talking about. To feed that to brain trauma patients, chronic traumatic encephalopathy patients, that's not going to help them. The neurology textbooks, nothing about Delatorre's vascular dementia theory. That's the best of all the dementia theories. The idea of the mouse equivalents, nothing about excitotoxicity. It's not even in the index of these massive 1,700-page books. It's a joke, okay? That would be like writing a textbook about baseball with nothing about pitching or catching, okay? I mean, it's just completely stupid. And these are the Ivy League textbooks. I'm not making this up. You can go check all of this stuff. I used to, hold these books in awe. I was very happy and proud. I won the best student in my class, 333 students. Otto Sapphire Award as the best pathology student. And I really wanted to learn, okay? And my mom had cancer, and I just figured send her to the cancer doctor. I didn't know anything about even any remote idea of nutrition being associated with cancer. I wish I had. And I know my oncologist tried hard. She lived about 11 years when they only thought she was going to live 2 or 3. And I know the oncologist's wife loved my mother. She came to our house and took care of her. I mean, they were great to my mother. I'm the one who screwed up that I didn't know this nutritional stuff that would have helped. They didn't know it either. They would have told her if they knew. They didn't know it. My father also had some cardiac problems, and he came out of that pretty well, but I think it subsequently caused a stroke, having his lima stapled to the LAD, left internal mammary artery stapled to the left anterior descending artery as part of a coronary artery bypass graft. And he threw the snow over his shovel. He threw the snow over his shoulder and stuck to the shovel, and he dissected his vertebral artery and had a stroke. If he hadn't had the cabbage, coronary artery bypass graft, he wouldn't have had a stroke. If I had come down stronger, it was many, 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 many years ago, on a vegan diet, he wouldn't have had to have the surgery. But I kind of got bullied out of it by the cardiologist. Okay, what else? Look at psychiatry. What a joke this is. They're prescribing all these psychiatric medicines to kids, which long term, anybody can look it up. They've got terrible outcomes. That's my point. Does science need God? And I'm saying yes, it does. Because if you start practicing so-called science without love, and the goal is just to make money, then it ends up exploiting people. This is exploitation of people. Psychiatry, poisoning children for drug money. Would you do that? Give a kid a drug that doesn't work and has a bad long-term prognosis when you didn't have to? That's wrong, okay? And so what I'm saying is if you have this atheistic Darwinism idea that humans are just talking primates, then there's no obligation to them. If you say we're all creatures created in the image of God and we have to help each other, love thy neighbor and all this stuff, follow the 10 commandments, then we have an obligation to each other to help each other. And, when you're good to the people around you and they're good to the people around them, it kind of ripples outward and everyone's better off. All of society is better off. Whereas when we get into this talking primate stuff, then there's nothing divine about a person. They have no natural rights. They really have no rights other than what their ruler gives to them. And, if you don't have an obligation to them, why not just make money off them? So I think that's sad and unfortunate. And I believe that there is a major role for God having influence on science. You don't need God to do a scientific experiment, but it's good to have these biblical values so that people are valued and treated well. And you could say you value somebody, but if you value somebody, why don't you at least offer them the best option for a dietary disease? The best option is to fix the diet, to treat that. No medical, surgical bullshitology can cure a dietary disease other than fixing the diet. You can lessen the complications of it. You can slow it down a bit with medications and surgeries, but you can't cure it. Diabetes type 2 is routinely cured if caught within the first couple of years by fixing the diet. Coronary artery disease, look at Esselstyn, all his patients that followed his diet, 198 of them, all cured. All right, I had another slide here, and some of this sort of came from a previous talk, but when I talked about, Martin Luther, basically here's a quote from Martin Luther from back in the 1500s. "If I am shown my error, then I will be the first to throw my books into the fire. I do not accept the authority of popes and councils and Ivy League medical centers, for they have contradicted each other. They've contradicted the medical literature. My conscience is captive to the Word of God. I cannot and will not recant anything, for to go against conscience is neither right nor safe. Here I stand. I can do no other. So help me God. Amen. Martin Luther. Let the vegan reformation begin. And so what I'm saying is, people deserve to know that their disease is caused by a dietary problem, and give them a chance. I think they should be given a chance. And certainly, I put these lectures up here on this YouTube channel so, the smarter, more curious people can find this information. And I realize most average lazy people, they're not going to care. They're not going to want to change. That's fine. But this stuff should be available. I might have been able to save my mother and father and buy them, a lot of extra time if I had known this.